White cop mocks black woman for no reason. Seconds later, the DEA arrives to arrest him. Something unexpected was brewing behind the thick heat of a summer afternoon in Philadelphia. Officer Ryan Calloway had no idea the routine patrol, one that gave him ample opportunity to spout his hateful words, would mark the beginning of his own downfall. Across the street, Maya Lawson, a determined black woman with a kind heart and a history of standing up for what's right, became the target of the officer's sneering remarks. Onlookers froze in shock as he unleashed an ugly barrage, mocking her. Little did he know, a far bigger storm was about to roll in, one that would bring the DA straight to his doorstep. Philadelphia in mid-July can be sweltering, with humidity that clings to the skin. Heat radiates off the asphalt like waves in the desert. On the corner of Broad Street, across from the well-known Temple University campus, street vendors hawk water bottles and the air felt thick with tension. The city had always been a melting pot of cultures, a historical epicenter of American independence, but behind the city's proud monuments and bustling neighborhoods lay daily stories of injustice, fleeting and potent as a match strike. Among the daily bustle stood Maya Lawson, a 29-year-old woman as resolute as a Philadelphia skyline. Maya's skin gleamed with a fine sheen of sweat as she waited for her bus. She carried a worn leather briefcase that bore the subtle scratches of life's battles, and inside it were carefully prepared documents for a community outreach program she volunteered for. Since her teenage years, Maya believed wholeheartedly in community solidarity and systematic change. Her father had marched with local activists in the 1990s, and she had inherited his pride, a pride that refused to be crushed by the system. On the adjacent corner, Officer Ryan Calloway was parking his squad car under the shade of a half-blooming elm tree. He was a man of medium build, broad-chested, with a permanent scowl etched into his features. His baseball cap bore the official patch of the Philadelphia Police Department. He was known around the precinct as someone who seldom wore a smile unless he was mocking or ridiculing someone else. Officer Calloway thrived on intimidation. Few people dared challenge him because he had a knack for turning every situation in his favor. That day, sweat beaded on Calloway's brow as well, and his uniform clung to his skin. He fidgeted inside the cruiser, flipping channels on the police radio, bored and restless. He was there to monitor traffic and cite anyone driving recklessly around Temple University, but it wasn't long before he was caught. He was arrested and charged with murder. He was there to monitor traffic and cite anyone driving recklessly around Temple University, but it wasn't long before his attention shifted elsewhere. A bright, persistent ringtone drew his eyes to Maya, who had just finished a phone call with the coordinator of her outreach program. From the scornful curl of his lip, it was clear that something in Maya's presence was bothering him. Calloway's partner for the day, Officer Daniel Holt, a man of fewer words and, some said, fewer scruples, glanced at his colleague's tense posture. Holt knew Calloway had a short fuse. He also knew Maya by sight. She was active in local causes and had once called out the police department for questionable stops in her community. She's always stirring up trouble, Calloway muttered. Look at her, all high and mighty. Holt shrugged, saying nothing. He had learned early on that challenging Calloway often ended badly. Besides, Holt's ambitions lay elsewhere. He'd apply for a specialized unit and get away from Calloway as soon as he could. He planned to keep his head down and avoid drama, if that was even possible around his hot-headed partner. As Maya's bus arrived, she walked forward, stepping off the curb to get in line. The bus's hydraulic hiss sounded. Suddenly a passing SUV swerved to avoid a jaywalker, hopped onto the curb, then back onto the street. Maya jumped away from the incoming vehicle and stumbled a step, right in Calloway's line of sight. He saw Maya moving abruptly, misread her actions, and stepped out of the cruiser, shouting, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Stand still." Calloway's voice rang out, making heads turn. Maya glanced over at him, momentarily puzzled. "I'm sorry, officer. The car nearly—" "I didn't ask for excuses," Calloway barked. "You people always have some story, don't you?" The phrase "you people" bristled against Maya's ears like a hornet's sting. She mustered a calm voice. "Sir, I was almost hit by that car. I just—" Calloway took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding on the pavement. "Don't talk back to me." Another loudmouth who thinks the rules don't apply to her. Typical. Maya swallowed. Onlookers stood by, uncertain whether to intervene. The oppressive heat did nothing to calm the tension. The bus driver watched from the vehicle door open, scanning the scene. Maya looked Officer Calloway in the eye, determined. Maya was not the only one who was shocked by the sudden change in the tension. The bus driver watched from the vehicle, door open, scanning the scene. Maya looked Officer Calloway in the eye, determined not to show fear or indignation. "Officer, you're misunderstanding. Save it," Calloway hissed. "I've heard enough. Just keep your distance from my streets. Lady, my streets." Maya felt her stomach churn. This was not the first time she had encountered this sort of blatant casual racism, but she refused to let it pass. She took a moment, inhaled, forcing composure. "I'm a Philadelphia native, and it's as much my city as it is anyone's." Calloway scoffed. "Sure it is. Next time, watch where you're going. I don't have the patience for any nonsense." Then, in a voice dripping with malice, Calloway mocked her, imitating her tone. It wasn't just an offhand remark. It was a cruel caricature meant to belittle. At that moment, Maya felt anger sear through her chest. She clenched her fists, inhaled once more, urging herself to remain steady. While Maya had every right to yell back, she knew confrontation might escalate into something even worse, something she could not afford. Yet in that moment of tension, neither Officer Calloway nor Maya noticed a black SUV idling further up the street, windows tinted, occupant carefully observing. Even Holt seemed focused on exchange, oblivious to who might be watching. The occupant in that SUV was silent, his face stoic. He had larger concerns than a heated sidewalk encounter, namely a rumor ring of corrupt officials that had been funneling drugs and money to the city. And though no one knew it yet, Ryan Calloway's name was about to come up at the top of that case. After Officer Calloway finally let Maya go with a warning she didn't deserve, she boarded the bus, her cheeks hot with humiliation and fury. She found a seat near the back, ignoring curious stares from passengers who had witnessed the exchange. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do something that could release the knot of anger in her chest. But she knew better. She had her own method of handling injustice. She would contact her local council member, share her experience, and lodge a formal complaint. As the bus rolled away, Maya stared at the window, still gripping her phone. She opened a new note in her device, her mind racing with details of the incident. She described Calloway, his mind racing with details of the incident. She described Calloway, his badge number, his partner's vague features, and everything that had been said. She wrote down the date, time, and exact location. Maya believed in thorough documentation. Her father had always told her that facts and details could be powerful weapons against wrongdoing. Across the city, Officer Calloway's day continued. He swaggered back to his squad car, a self-satisfied grin tugging at his lips. "Ready to roll?" he asked Holt. Without waiting for a response, he revved the engine, pulling away from the curb. The encounter with Maya seemed to rejuvenate him in some sick way. He liked showing he was in control. But behind Calloway's bravado lurked a deeper secret, one that had started innocently enough but had become a snare tightening around him. 2 years earlier, Calloway's mother had fallen ill. The hospital bills, coupled with her long-term care facility costs, weighed on him. The salary of a police officer was decent, but not enough to cover all her needs plus his own living expenses. Under the strain of looming debt, Calloway had found a friend in a local narcotics ring that offered a side income for turning a blind eye to certain transactions or occasionally providing tips about police activity. What began as small hush money soon became a monthly flow of cash that dwarfed his official paycheck. He rationalized it at first, telling himself it was just a settled debt and support his mother. But once the money started coming, it was difficult to let go. Now as Calloway drove through familiar neighborhoods, passing by boarded-up row homes and corner bodegas, he glanced at Holt. The younger officer fiddled with the radio, not meeting Calloway's eyes. Calloway's guilt sometimes manifested as bursts of frustration and rage. He had become particularly nasty toward anyone who reminded him of vulnerability or accountability. People like Maya Lawson, who had that indomitable spirit. They cruised past a local diner named Sylvana's, a popular community spot with no-frills breakfast and lunch. To the air, Calloway and Holt sat at the counter, removing their hats. The waitress, A woman in her early 50s with a warm smile greeted them. "Hot day out there," she said, pouring coffee into their mugs. "Anything special for you boys today?" Calloway sneered. "Just the usual. Eggs over easy bacon and keep the coffee coming." Holt ordered the same. As a waitress walked away, Holt filled with a napkin, searching for something to say that might diffuse the tension. "You think that lady earlier will file complaint?" Calloway shrugged, a derisive chuckle escaping his lips. "Probably. I'm not worried. Nothing will stick. They rarely do." That was a chilling truth of it. In many internal affairs investigations, especially lacking clear video evidence, the result was often a slap on the wrist, if that. Calloway had done this before and come out unscathed. He had mentors in the department who turned a blind eye to his antics. But this time was different. A bigger net was being cast by the DEA in collaboration with the Department of Justice investigating a citywide corruption ring, and certain names had already surfaced in preliminary intel. A couple of tables down, two men sat quietly finishing their pancakes. One was broad-shouldered with black windbreakers slung over the back of his chair, out of place for summer in Philadelphia. Despite the heat, it bore an emblem, DA in bold yellow letters. Calloway paid them no attention. It was not uncommon to see different law enforcement agencies around the city. He had no clue that he himself was already on someone's radar. Later that evening, Maya sat at her dining room table in her modest one-bedroom apartment. She had a complaint form open on her laptop, a half-eaten takeout container of pad thai at her side. The overhead fan circled lazily, pushing around the muggy air. She typed in the details, date, time, badge number, location, and the racial slurs and mocking she had endured. She also included names of potential witnesses. The memory of Calloway's cruel voice lingered, still fresh. She felt a surge of anger, but also a spark of purpose. This was how she fought back, through formal channels, to activism, to the unwavering resilience her parents taught her. After hitting submit, Maya leaned back, feeling both exhausted and relieved. She texted a friend. Letting it slide. Kendra Wells. Proud of you, sis. Let me know if you need me to rally folks or bring attention to it. We stand with you. They chatted a bit more, discussing upcoming events and local protests. Maya eventually ended the call, took a deep breath, and decided to prepare for bed. The next day would be busy with her outreach program where she taught job skills to at-risk youth. She believed wholeheartedly in building pathways that saved kids from the streets. The last thing she thought of before sleep claimed her was Calloway's sneer, a reminder that her fight was far from over. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Calloway was also having a restless night. He lived in a small row home in South Philly, an area where houses stood wall to wall, sometimes neglected, but still brimming with city life. The red brick facade of his building needed work, and the front steps were cracked. Inside, his living room was sparsely furnished. His mother's hospital bills sat in a neat pile on the coffee table, a grim reminder of his obligations. Calloway slumped onto his old recliner, the leather peeling at the edges. He stared at the TV news, not fully absorbing the headlines. He wondered if Maya Lawson would escalate her complaint. He had a stack of pending disciplinary notes, but he also had a knack for maneuvering around them. Still, an inexplicable dread gnawed at him, as though the comfortable shell he built around his misdeeds was about to crack. He changed the channel and saw a report about the Drug Enforcement Administration busting a significant heroin operation in North Philadelphia. The footage showed crates of seized drugs and firearms, with agents wearing bulletproof vests marked DEA. Calloway felt his stomach twist. Over the past few months, the local narcotics ring he was entangled with had grown more brazen, and he'd heard whispers that the feds were stepping up their game. After all, whenever the DA got involved, it was never a half measure. They came with an iron fist. Calloway tried to reassure himself. They won't connect the dots. They won't know about my involvement. After all, he was just a low-level tipster, occasionally letting certain shipments slip by. He quickly turned off the TV, flicking the room into darkness. The tension in his jaw refused to dissipate, as though some subconscious part of him sensed the walls closing in. The next morning, Maya headed to the local community center on foot. She enjoyed greeting neighbors and small business owners. This part of Philadelphia, despite its many challenges, felt like home. She spent the morning teaching a workshop on resume building and interview tips to a small group of teenagers. Their faces ranged from hopeful to skeptical, but Maya had a way of breaking the ice, sharing personal anecdotes. Over the course of 2 hours, she saw the kids begin to blossom with curiosity. When the workshop ended, a young man named Jamal Turner lingered. He was tall, thin, dressed in an oversized hoodie despite the heat. He thanked Maya shyly for the pointers, mentioning he hoped to find a job to help his mom. Maya smiled and gave him extra materials, urging him to come back next week. These small connections fueled her passion, reminding her why she continued to fight, even as she had a battle with corrupt officers. As Maya left the community center, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted. She had an odd feeling that the driver might be watching her, though she couldn't see inside. A flicker of fear ran through her. Ever since she'd become more vocal at city council meetings, Maya sometimes felt she was under surveillance by the authorities who didn't appreciate her brand of activism. Or maybe it was just her heightened awareness after what Calloway had pulled. She hurried her pace, glancing back occasionally. The SUV didn't move. Unbeknownst to Maya, inside that SUV was Special Agent Ethan Carter from the DEA, a man of experience in deep cover operations. Agent Carter had been working on a citywide drug corruption case for months, maybe even years. He had pictures and files pinned up in his office. Some of those pictures included Officer Ryan Calloway. Carter's sources hinted that Calloway was the weakest link in the chain, a man with a troubled personal situation who had compromised his badge for cash. Carter also had intelligence that Calloway's anger management issues and racist tendencies weren't just personal failings. They'd made him sloppy. Sloppiness was a DEA's best friend in building a case. Carter was there to keep an eye on Maya Lawson, not because she was under suspicion, but because she had just filed a complaint against Calloway. Often, official complaints stirred up departmental interest. Carter wanted to see if her complaint might inadvertently align with the bigger picture they were assembling. He suspected Maya might become a target for Calloway if the officer felt threatened. Carter was determined to ensure that any piece of evidence that might implicate Calloway would be preserved, and that Maya remained safe. For days past, Maya's complaint wound through the labyrinth of internal affairs. Officer Calloway continued his daily beat, feigning an air of nonchalance. However, the city's rumor mill churned out whispers that the feds were building a case involving corruption at multiple levels. Some in the department were anxious. Others shrugged it off as just another round of allegations. One bright afternoon, Maya found herself heading to a local bakery to pick up pastries for an upcoming fundraiser. She stepped out of the bakery, balancing boxes in her arms, when she nearly bumped into Officer Calloway. He stood at the corner, ticket pad in hand, scrawling a citation for a car parked too close to a fire hydrant. Maya froze, heart pounding. She reminded herself to stay composed. She had done nothing wrong. Calloway glanced up, recognition flickering in his eyes. His lip curled into a cruel half-smile. Well, if it isn't the troublemaker herself, he drawled. Maya didn't bite. She sidestepped him, determined to keep moving. But Calloway wasn't about to let her pass without a show. He raised his voice. No greeting? Too good for me now, huh? People on the sidewalk slowed to watch, tension rippling in the summer air. Maya drew a steadying breath. Have a good day, officer. She kept her voice measured, polite, not want to give him an excuse. Calloway's nostrils flared. His eyes flicked to the pastry boxes. Got a license for selling those on the street? He jeered. I'm not selling them, she replied calmly. They're for a charity fundraiser. He chuckled cruelly. Sure they are. As she turned to walk away, he spat out another hateful remark that made heads turn. Next time, don't give me a reason to put you in cuffs. You might not like how it feels. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She refused to let him see her shaken. At the same time, a small crowd that had witnessed the interaction stood whispering among themselves. A couple of bystanders discreetly recorded the encounter on their phones. The community's frustration was brewing. A block away, hidden by the swirl of pedestrians, Agent Carter watched from the driver's seat of his SUV. He witnessed Calloway's confrontation with Maya. Every vicious word that left the officer's mouth. Carter's jaw tensed. Calloway's arrogance was a missing puzzle piece that would inevitably lead to his downfall. Carter was patient, methodical, and professional. He already had the wiretaps, the suspicious bank deposits, and even a few insider testimonies. All that remained was a final proof tying Calloway to the narcotics ring in a way that no defense attorney could spin away. On a humid Friday evening, the city lights glittered against a sky that had turned a dusky purple. Officer Calloway was off duty, but he had a meeting, one he dreaded but couldn't avoid. He drove his personal car, a battered sedan, to a parking garage near the waterfront. The Delaware River glistened in the distance under soft moonlight. Calloway checked his phone, scanning for instructions from his contact within the ring. Sure enough, a text message. Level 3, corner slot, black SUV. He pulled in, the echo of tires reverberating off the concrete walls. On level 3, he spotted the black SUV. He parked beside it, his heart hammering. Every time he met these guys, he was reminded of a precarious line he straddled. A tinted window rolled down. A voice emerged from the darkness. "You're late, Calloway." Calloway recognized the voice of Dante Vargas, a local enforcer for the drug syndicate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and tattoos climbing from his collar onto his scalp. Vargas's cold eyes pinned Calloway in place. "I got here as soon as I could," Calloway mumbled, stepping out his car. His palms were sweaty. "What's up?" Vargas tossed a thick envelope on the SUV's hood. "Your payment. We need you to pass along any info about new PD or DEA movements in North Philly. Heard a rumor that the feds are sniffing around for bigger fish." Calloway swallowed. "I'll do what I can, but it's risky." Vargas's lips curled into a contemptuous grin. "You like paying your mama's bills, right? Then it's not that risky." Calloway snatched the envelope. The hushed money weighed like a lead ball in his hand. "Got it. Let me know if there's anything specific you need." Vargas gave a brief nod. "Watch your back, cop. If you go down, you better not take us with you." Calloway felt a chill creep down his spine. He offered a tight nod and hurried back to his car. As he started the ignition, he noticed another vehicle rounding the corner, dark, inconspicuous, and possibly watching. Fear churned in his stomach. The entire meetup took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Little did Calloway know, 2 floors above, perched behind tinted glass, Agent Carter had just recorded everything with a high-zoom camera lens. Agent Carter had just recorded everything with a high-zoom camera lens. Carter had arrived half an hour early, hiding in a nondescript sedan. While waiting for the rendezvous, he captured the license plates, the envelope exchange, enough to secure a search warrant if needed. The clarity of Calloway's face was unmistakable. Carter quietly exhaled. This was the break they needed. The following Monday, Maya visited City Hall for a meeting with a local council representative, Ms. Olivia Ramirez, about her complaint. Maya wasn't naive about the bureaucracy, but she believed shining a light on the problem had value. She stepped to the towering columns of the historic building, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The meeting room smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Ms. Ramirez, a middle-aged Latina woman with a reputation for championing civil rights issues, shook Maya's hand warmly. "Thank you for coming," Ms. Ramirez said, guiding Maya to a chair. "We received your complaint. I'm trying to push for a thorough investigation, but you know how the wheels can turn slowly around here." Maya nodded. "I appreciate any help, Miss Ramirez. People are tired of being intimidated. Officer Calloway's racist remarks aren't just about me. They're part of a broader issue, Missy." Ramirez leaned forward, her eyes reflecting empathy. "You're not the first person to file against him, but we have to build enough momentum to force the department to act. I'm also hearing rumors about federal involvement in some corruption cases. We'll see how that unfolds." Relief washed over Maya. She wasn't alone. "Let's hope. If you need me for any testimonies, I'm ready." Leaving City Hall, Maya felt a surge of renewed resolve. She had done her part for now, though uncertain how long it might take. She felt confident that pressure was mounting on Calloway from multiple angles: her complaint, community pushback, and possibly more. What Maya didn't realize was just how quickly events were escalating behind the scenes. The DEA had spent months compiling evidence of Calloway's misdeeds. Agent Carter had even more intel now, thanks to the secret recording in the parking garage. The plan was nearly in place, a multi-agency operation to take down not only the narcotics ring, but also any officers on their payroll. 2 weeks later, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Kendra Wells. Kendra Wells, urgent. Another woman targeted by Calloway near the same bus stop where you were harassed. Need you to come over. She's scared to file a report, but might if we support her. Maya's frustration flared. Calloway was still out there, abusing his position. She knew she had to help. She arranged to meet Kendra Wells and the frightened woman, an elderly lady named Dorothy Simmons, in a small cafe near 12th Street. Dorothy Simmons recounted a familiar scenario, Calloway yelling racial slurs, threatening to arrest her over a minor issue. The woman trembled with humiliation as she spoke. Maya held her hand gently, offering reassurance. It's not your fault, Maya said softly. He's been doing this to others. We need your voice, too. If we all come together, they can't ignore it. Dorothy Simmons nodded, her eyes moist. I just don't want any trouble. He knows where I live. He threatened to come by if I didn't keep my mouth shut. Maya's heart clenched. Calloway was growing bolder, nastier. She and Kendra Wells comforted Dorothy Simmons, promising to help. They agreed to accompany her to file a formal complaint at the precinct. In their minds, they envisioned a wave of evidence so large that even the slow cogs of bureaucracy would have to grind into motion. Meanwhile, Calloway's internal panic had reached new heights. The narcotics ring he was working with demanded more favors. He faced the possibility that Maya and others might build enough momentum to end his career. Little did Calloway know, the real threat wasn't the departmental complaint. It was a DA closing in like a silent shark beneath murky waters. That evening, he patrolled the same neighborhood near Temple University, feeling more than ever that everyone was watching him. He saw Maya once again, stepping out of a convenience store. A flame of anger ignited in his chest. He felt cornered, paranoid. If only she would back down, he thought. But Maya Lawson was not the kind of woman who would ever back down. Across the street, that black SUV sat once more, tinted windows concealing the watchers. Calloway spat on the ground, cursing his luck. Something big was brewing. He could sense it, and he was right in the crosshairs. The final hammer came down late on a Friday afternoon, a day when people's guards might be lowered. Thinking about weekend plans, Calloway was in the middle of writing a traffic citation on a quiet block when his radio crackled. All available units request immediate response 223, North Redwood Street, possible 1066. The dispatcher's voice sounded tense. Calloway recognized the code for a suspicious person possibly armed. Normally he might ignore such a call if it wasn't on his assigned beat, but Redwood Street was just a couple blocks away. He hopped into his cruiser, anxious to do something that might prove his value as a police officer. If he nabbed a suspect, maybe it would overshadow the mounting complaints. He arrived to find an abandoned old warehouse, its broken windows boarded up, the exterior plastered with torn posters. The door stood ajar. A single squad car was parked out front, but no sign of other officers. Calloway called his location, stepping carefully into the dim interior. The place smelled of rot and old metal. Dust motes swirled in the beams of late afternoon sunlight. Then he heard footsteps. He whipped around, hand on his holster. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. A tall man, wearing a black windbreaker. On the front, in big yellow letters, with initials DA, Officer Ryan Calloway. The man said in a firm, calm voice, raising a badge. Calloway's stomach dropped. He glanced around, noticing several more men and women stepping into view, each wearing the same windbreaker. This wasn't a suspicious person call. This was a federal sting. This is a warrant for your arrest. The agent continued, his voice echoing in the hollow space. You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance, accepting bribes, and aiding and abetting a criminal organization. Federal charges. Calloway's hand shook on his gun. He contemplated drawing it for a second, but the moment he thought about it, he realized half a dozen agents were already aiming at him. He was outgunned, outmaneuvered, out of options. Put your hands in the air, came another voice now. Defeated, Calloway complied. He felt them grab his wrists, snapping cold metal cuff around them. The pinch against the skin was as jarring as a lightning strike. Everything happened so fast. The facade he had built for years, his bravado, his intimidation tactics, his power plays, was crumbling before his very eyes. They patted him down, removing his service weapon, radio and phone. His badge and nameplate glinted under flickering overhead light. The city he had tormented, the department he had exploited, and the bribes he had taken all converged in this single moment. His mind scrambled, searching for some to say, some defense. But the DA agents looked at him with cold detachment. Their job was to enforce federal law, and they had the evidence to bury him outside the warehouse as Calloway was led in cuffs toward an unmarked federal vehicle. The sun was setting in a blazing orange sky. By the final chapter of a book he never thought would close, a small crowd had gathered behind police tape. Among them, Maya stood with her phone in hand, capturing the scene on video. She had just happened to be on her way to a nearby community event when commotion drew her attention. She recognized Calloway's face instantly. The cosmic irony was nearly overwhelming. The officer who had mocked her repeatedly, who had threatened in lieu of so many, was now powerless. Forcibly shuffled in the back seat of a federal SUV, Maya's chest fluttered, not with vengeance, but with relief. At that moment she wasn't sure if her complaint had any direct impact on the timing of this arrest, but she felt validated. Good had finally caught up with evil. Calloway's eyes swept across the crowd and locked onto Maya. The hatred and regret roiled in his gaze, but all Maya felt was an overwhelming sense of closure. She lowered her phone as the SUV's door slammed shut, the crowd murmuring in amazement. Sirens wailed in the distance as more law enforcement vehicles arrived. The stifling summer heat remained, but something felt lighter in the air, like a heavy burden had been lifted from the city's chest. Word of Calloway's arrest rippled through Philadelphia like a shockwave. Local news stations flashed headlines: corrupt officer taken down by DEA. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran an article highlighting that the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office had uncovered a web of corruption linking police officers to a large-scale drug operation. Calloway was only one of several arrests made that day, but his name became a centerpiece, especially once multiple residents came forward with stories of his racist harassment. Within hours, the police department issued a statement condemning his actions. Internal Affairs released a briefing that there had been numerous complaints, some of which were under review. The department promised a thorough house cleaning, though skepticism remained high among the public. Still, the fact that an officer had been publicly arrested gave many residents a renewed sense of hope that no one was beyond accountability. Maya found herself fielding calls from local community leaders and journalists. She gave a measured statement emphasizing the need for systematic reforms to prevent officers like Calloway from operating unchecked. She also spoke privately to Dorothy Simmons and others who had suffered under Calloway's abusive behavior, encouraging them to speak their truth if investigators asked for testimony. Sitting in her apartment one evening, Maya sipped tea and rewatched the clip she had recorded of Calloway's arrest, both to confirm the event were real and to solidify her sense of closure. She knew the road ahead was still long. Countless officers like Calloway existed across the country, but for once it felt like justice had been served in her corner of a world. Across town, in a cramped holding cell at a federal detention facility, Calloway awaited his first hearing. The noise of metal doors slamming, voices echoing down the halls, formed his new soundtrack. He sat on a thin cot, head in his hands, the stale odor of disinfectant and sweat filling his nostrils. Federal agents had enumerated the charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The weight of possible decades in prison loomed over him. His mind replayed countless interactions: the bribes, the hush money, the deals with criminals, and the way he mocked innocent people to mask his own fears and insecurities. In his darkest hour, Calloway thought of his ailing mother. How would she cope without him covering her bills? He thought of the short thrill he got from easy money weighed against the humiliation of being locked up like a criminal himself. Regret stabbed at him like an icy blade. In the end, he alone bore responsibility for choosing this path. The community watched as Calloway's trial proceeded. The prosecution's evidence was damning. Bank records recorded conversations, testimonies from multiple ring members, and even the hidden camera footage from a parking garage. In addition, numerous complaints about his racial harassment were cited to emphasize his disregard for both the law and civil rights. It wasn't long before Calloway's defense began to crumble under the weight of undeniable facts. When the guilty verdict finally came, it rang out in the courtroom with the gravity of a gavel striking an anvil. Maya, who attended part of the trial, sat quietly in the gallery, watching Calloway's reaction. For a moment, she almost felt pity at the despair etched on his face. He hung his head, shoulders slumped, no longer the arrogant man who had mocked her on the sidewalk. The realization that he had lost everything, his badge, his freedom, his reputation, seemed to crush him from the inside. Outside, reporters buzz around, hungry for statements. Maya offers a short remark. This is a step toward accountability, but the fight continues. We have to stay vigilant to ensure all officers uphold the law equally. She refused to let the narrative become solely about Calloway, pushing instead for deeper reforms and support for the communities harmed by such corruption. The city council took a proposal for independent review boards and stricter oversight. There were heated debates, powerful speeches, and new alliances formed between activists, city officials, and honest officers determined to rebuild trust. No single event could fix systemic issues overnight, but Calloway's arrest served as a catalyst that many hoped would spark lasting change. In the weeks and months after the verdict, Maya went about her life with renewed energy, expanding her outreach program and continuing to mentor youth. She also advocated for police-community dialogues, facilitating workshops where residents and officers could talk face-to-face, share experiences, and promote empathy. Some officers came reluctantly, but few admitted they found the effort refreshing, an opportunity to break down barriers and rebuild trust from the ground up. Dorothy Simmons, one so terrified to file a complaint found solace in a group of neighbors who banded together, discussing ways to report police misconduct safely. She even volunteered at a local senior center, sharing her story to encourage others to speak up about injustice. As for Calloway, he became a cautionary tale whispered among officers at the precinct. Some said he got what was coming to him. Others pointed to the tragedy of a man who let desperation and moral weakness pave a road to ruin. His name lingered like a bad memory, an unwelcome ghost reminding everyone that the system was fallible. The real triumph belonged to the community that refused to be silenced. Maya's complaint, combined with growing frustration from other residents, intersected perfectly with the DA's bigger investigation. Sometimes justice needs a chorus of voices and the unwavering determination of people who refuse to be intimidated by bullies. And so the chapter on Officer Calloway closes, locked away behind cold bars where his cruelty and corruption can no longer harm those he once tormented. To the courageous stand of people like Maya Lawson and the relentless pursuit of truth by federal agents, the city caught a glimpse of genuine change. It reminds us that no matter how deeply rooted racism and injustice might be, they cannot stand forever against the collective will of a community determined to hold wrongdoers accountable. If you believe in uplifting these stories of justice, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you play an active role in spreading awareness and inspiring others to raise their voices against oppression. Together, let's inspiring others to raise their voices against oppression.